Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Davis Phinney Foundation's Women's Panel. I am Devin Fulford. I'm our Director of Education and Content. I am so happy to be here with you all today. I will go around and let all of our panelists introduce themselves to you before we kick off the conversation today. So let's start with Karen, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. My name's Karen Frank. I have been diagnosed with Parkinson's since 2018. I'm currently 53 years old. I used to work as a nurse anesthetist in my former life before Parkinson's, and now I do a lot of volunteer work for Parkinson's. I don't do that anymore, and I have the privilege of being able to be here with this group of women to talk about what it's like being a woman with Parkinson's.
Thank you, Karen. How about Patty?
My name's Patty Burnett. I live in Dillon, Colorado, and have had Parkinson's for about 11 years. And I have 4 grandkids, a husband who is amazingly supportive of me and the journey that we're on together with Parkinson's. And like Karen, I volunteer a bunch like all of us in this panel, we volunteer a bunch helping people that are newly diagnosed with Parkinson's in many cases.
Thank you, Patty. Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Lamers. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've had Parkinson's for 6 years. I was diagnosed when I was about 42 and I just turned 49. So the math it does work out, I promise. I'm married. I have 3 kids. I've got a junior in high school, freshman in high school, and a 6th grader. So
Thank you so much, Terry. Jasmine.
Hi, I'm Jasmine, Jasmine Stir. I live in Los Angeles, and I have had Parkinson's for 15 years now. I am 29, 30 later this year, and my symptoms really started when I was 14. I had a little bit of stuff before that, but it was really noticeable when I was 14. I was diagnosed in college, and I had DBS in college as well. 9 years ago, and I have significant gastric issues with Parkinson's. It's one of my big things. If I look a little bit strange during this, it's because I had my port taken out on Friday. I was on IV nutrition on and off for the past 9 years, and thanks to progress in treatment with a medication called Motegrity, I'm doing a lot better and am able to be fully off the IV stuff. So, I've had it now for a long time. And yeah, happy to be here with this awesome group of women.
Likewise. Thank you, Jasmine. Sandra.
Hi, I'm Sandra Chu. I am from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I have had Parkinson's. I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's for 4 years. I'm currently 35. I am a stay-at-home mom. Prior to that, I was a nurse for 10 years.
Thank you, Sandra. And we have a new addition to the panel this month. Please welcome Stephanie.
Hi, thanks, Devin. Hi, I am Stephanie Johnson. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I am 57. I was just diagnosed with Parkinson's on March 11th of this year, and recently lost my beloved husband, Rick. We were married for 34 years. He passed away the day after Christmas with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease dementia. And then we also learned that he had Alzheimer's. So my poor guy had 2 really significant brain diseases. I'm grateful to be wrapped into the amazing group of women here, and was inspired when I saw the first Women in Parkinson's webinar, and I'm just really grateful to be a part of this group and to be able to share some of my own experience that might be helpful to others. My previous career, I worked as a medical social worker for many years, and then did some community health improvement work on behalf of hospitals, and also worked as a life coach. I stopped working about 4 years ago to care for my husband, and am now volunteering here. And I also volunteer as a cuddler in the NICU at my local hospital.
Oh.
So that just fills my soul. So thank you.
Isn't that the best job title ever?
I know, cuddler.
So cute. Thank you, Stephanie. We're so glad to have you. So glad to be here and share some time with all of you again today. So right before we started recording, Patty had a really interesting question. What was your question, Patty?
For a long time, I've noticed that like our local support group, Davis Phinney ambassadors, PD Self, all the things that I'm involved in are mostly women who attend. And yet we've heard from years now that it's men who are the most, there are more men affected by Parkinson's than women. So I'm just curious what you guys think of that, what you think the reason is, and how we can help the men come on board, I guess. Any thoughts?
I think it's a super interesting question. We see women volunteering for public-facing roles so much more frequently than men. So all the different spaces you mentioned, Patty, the Foundation's ambassador program, the PD Self course that we do, both the facilitation for that course and then also the participants who have showed up for it are largely women. We have mostly women on all of these things. And so why?
Could it have something to do with connection? You know, that we as women want to be connected with other women, especially who are going through similar stuff that we're going through, so that we can talk about it. Because I don't know, maybe men just don't, that's not a priority for them like it might be for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think a little bit like a scientist when I answer this question, because I think, well, what other factors are going on? I know women love to talk about things. When I compare myself to my husband, for example, not just because he's quiet and introverted, but women in general, we like to talk about things, and guys, when they get together, don't seem to talk about the same sorts of deep emotional issues most of the time. But then I think like a scientist, and I think, well, how many of us just in this panel, I'm curious, are still working right now? Any of us? So okay, Jasmine, I'm wondering, is there a confounding thing about maybe most of us not working currently? Maybe men with Parkinson's work longer or differently, and maybe they're busy at work. I know my husband wouldn't take off in the middle of the day to do something like this, and it may have nothing to do with it. I certainly think there are things about being a woman that lend to sort of having that nurturing nature, and we want to be present for other people, and maybe that's a factor involved as well.
You know, it could be another factor is within this group, young onset Parkinson's is pretty big for 4 of you guys, right? And I'm curious whether there's been any study to see about men, whether they're as affected with young onset as women are.
I don't have any.
Could that be hormonal?
Data, but I do notice less men in the youngest group. Like I know more women. As for in the juvenile onset group, which I said I maybe know like 15, 20 people like me out there.
That you actually know, Jasmine, or that you have read about?
That I actually know of and like interact with, and I'd say 3, 4 of them are men. So I think that it's mostly women who have the young onset. Like so they don't have any. There aren't any studies on us, so
none at all.
It's not. I mean, there's a couple, and part of the problem is there's a couple different mutations, so it's a little bit specific to that. It's just it's considered, in the ultra rare category, so it's just not nearly as studied.
Right.
And that's kind of for me, other than camaraderie and just looking for other people living similar symptoms and such, the lack of research for women is kind of what triggered me to reach out to find more people as well. Because I would think and go, well, they say there's more men, but I see more women.
Right.
Of all the young onset people I've met more recently, it's a high priority presence of women again. And then all the things that plague me, like how much do your hormones play a role? Does that trigger some of these symptoms more? Does it exacerbate it more? Does it make a difference? I went for multiple years with the medicines not working from the pharmaceutical side, and I would have exacerbated symptoms with hormone fluctuations even before being on medications. Whereas I know it plays into medications as well. So I guess for me, I was always curious, like, how does that play into just the symptoms and the diagnosis in general.
Yeah, before we were sort of talking about this before we moved on to actually recording, because we always tend to say too many good things before we start recording. But we had kind of talked about research in a bit, and coming from, my perspective, I'm a chemist, that's my background. So I've read a lot of research papers, and we were talking about most of the research is done on men. A lot of the studies are done on men, and so I was thinking about it. It's like at this point we have this women's panel, but if women are mostly the ones out there doing advocacy stuff, are we really now underrepresented? Like, do we have an issue where men are underrepresented? Maybe in that sphere, but not in research. In research, at one point I was really curious to see how many studies have been done on periods and Parkinson's, because, like you said, with hormonal fluctuations, every time I get my period, my Parkinson's is terrible. So, I'm on my third Mirena now. But there was like one study from the 80s, another one from the 90s, and then it was kind of never followed up on. Which, I mean, and that's how basic research can be if no one continues to follow that up on, but like it's not been studied significantly at all, despite the fact that it's a universal experience for women, particularly premenopausal women. And there's probably more as people who have Parkinson's go through menopause. It's probably another thing that that I haven't experienced yet, but that's not talked about either. That's not studied either. So we have this like big issue where we have a huge lack of research for women, and how that interacts with the advocacy side is interesting, because too often those spheres don't connect.
True.
There's
You brought up an interesting point, Jasmine, and I want to come back around and talk about menopause and perimenopause and hormonal changes that happen in life. But if you're comfortable, and if not, please, we'll just cut this part out of the webinar. You you mentioned being on the third Mirena. I know that's an intrauterine device, and it's the hormonal one. So do you tend not to have a period?
No, I don't. I have not had a period since I was 18 years old, and I plan on never having it again. I took a really bad fall when I was 18, because every time it's the only time I ever experienced this. When I had my period, it was like my legs felt like I had like lead weights on them. Like they were so heavy. Lifting up my legs was such a chore. And I tripped over a curb right in front of the mailboxes at my college, and I split my chin open on the concrete. And I was like, screw this, I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to ever be period again. And other women in a support group on Facebook told me that they had Mirenas, and that's what worked. And at that point in early 2013, they hadn't really put Mirenas in young people at that point. It was mostly for women who had babies already. And I think I was like the youngest by 10 years. My OBGYN had put one in, but she agreed to because I showed her other people's experiences, which I think goes to show you how much other people's experiences can sway your doctor. Say, hey, you might not have seen this before. You probably never had a patient with this, but here's what other women have said who've gone through this. This is what's worked for them. It can be a really huge tool in talking to your doctor. So because that had gotten rid of the periods, it solved the issue. So I had the first one put in, and then 5 years later, I started to get it again. And as soon as I bled a little bit, I was like, next day in the hospital. The next one lasted 6 years. Actually, earlier this month, I actually had it under anesthesia, which you can ask for, and you should, because it hurts like
general or local?
Yeah, general anesthesia.
General.
They knocked me out, put it in because it's painful. It's really stupidly painful. And it feels like you're being ripped in half. And I was like, I don't want to feel this anymore. I've had way too much medical trauma. So I asked for under anesthesia, and they did it. And I got my third one put in earlier this month. Anesthesia and Parkinson's is a whole other topic.
Indeed.
Yeah. But, and that causes some issues, but those issues were much more preferable to going through it awake.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting that you mentioned that, because my experience is the opposite. Like that very first day of my period, I'm like, hallelujah, like just everything is better for me. It's significantly it's like night and day. So, but again,
with your symptoms?
Yes, my symptoms get so much better that first day of my period until about like 2 weeks late, like 2 weeks later, and
Corresponds with
then
the
the other
ovulation.
half, so that second half, that those 2 weeks prior to my period, it gets worse again.
Yeah. There is
But
an opposite
again,
schedule, but same issue.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like the impact that our hormones have is incredible.
Evident, if
Yeah,
not.
very evident.
Yeah, at some point I'm gonna write a paper on this because I just need this to be in the freaking literature already.
I know.
But
Mhm.
And unique to each person, like whatever hormone fluctuation maybe triggers mine is clearly not the same if it's at different parts in the cycles for everybody.
Mhm.
Or it could be the same because that's maybe your mix of hormones. So it's interesting. Kind of outside the Parkinson's world, I do a lot of research on my own, just into dopamine and just women's hormones in general, because I don't feel like I find it within the stuff I'm looking with in Parkinson's. And one of the theories they say, just in terms of the hormone piece, is that you used to look around at the researchers and there was one woman and all men. But now the new researchers are all getting older. And so they're like, well, they're researching what's important to them. And you didn't look into hormones if you didn't have a cycle yourself, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully the research is coming.
women in STEM. Yeah.
Yeah.
For being a perimenopausal woman when I got diagnosed, I actually had my last period when I was 46, and I was diagnosed at 47. And I had an IUD in as well, the Mirena. So I hadn't had a period for a long time. And then when I had the Mirena taken out, I was on a pill that I think you only had it every 3 or 4 times a year. But I found that everything was new when I first got diagnosed. The hormonal fluctuations, the Parkinson's not working, bit of depression thrown in there after getting the diagnosis, a new relationship because I moved in with my current husband now, but we weren't married at the time. And 6 months later was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So there were so many things that were happening at the same time. And I think as a woman in general, and I think I spoke about this in a former webinar, sometimes people are just sort of pointing the finger. It's like when you come to that signpost and your arrow's pointing in every direction, how to get somewhere. I feel like that in the healthcare system sometimes as a woman, because, you know, who's to deal with these things? Is it the neurologist, or are they going to send you to the gynecologist, or the gynecologist send you to the urologist, or all of the above? And the primary care doesn't want to deal with any of it because they're like specialists for these things. So I felt like my head was spinning around and I wasn't sure who to go for what problem. And it was really related to being a woman. I don't think a man would have had that same conundrum because there isn't a men's doctor for men's issues as opposed to women who have a gynecologist. And I don't think it's just in neurology. I think in general practice, women often are torn between specialists of who is supposed to attend to what issue. And I find medical providers are so busy and they're not always wanting to take on that extra work or go that extra step when there's another specialist to handle that problem. And I don't think it comes from ill will as a physician. I just think women have that experience a lot.
You know, before I had GBS, my MDS said that there was a study going on to try to figure out if women were neglected medically, whether it's GBS, heart transplants, you know, other types of transplants. And they found that to be the case, that often physicians will offer things to men that they would not to women. Have you guys heard about
yeah,
that?
pain is absolutely ignored.
Or chalk it up to like it's in your head. It's like not really a symptom.
Anxiety.
Anxiety, or they'll
Plan.
do some kind of other psychological diagnosis instead.
Or not taking pain seriously when women report pain. When men report pain, it's taken
Or
very
given meds. Yeah.
I've got this thing. Oh, go ahead, Steph.
Oh, what's coming up for me is this sort of fear that I had going into my neurology appointment where you know, I've been having this collection of symptoms for a year and a half with quivering and tremoring on my right side and some other, you know, my arm swing was decreased. I was dragging my right foot and you know, trying not to make up a story about this is all like looking like Parkinson's to me. It can't possibly be Parkinson's. And my fear was when I went to this neurology appointment that the neurologist would say, you know, honey, you've been under a lot of stress caring for your husband this year. And, you know, pat, you just need to rest and take care of yourself. Like that was the fear I had going in. And this neurologist was not like that at all. He was very skilled and compassionate and sensitive. And when I said to him, you know, I'm trying not to make up a story, but how often have you seen an experience where one partner has Parkinson's and the other partner also develops a diagnosis of Parkinson's? And what I thought he was going to say was, you know, it's not uncommon that people develop like sympathy tremors. Like, you know, like sometimes men will get sympathy labor pains or sympathy. And so, but he did not say that. Was saying we're learning a lot more about the relationship between gut health and the folding of this proteins and exposure to environmental toxins. But it was an interesting, what I'm reflecting on is that need to be prepared for what if this person is minimizing my lived experience of very real and scary symptoms and dismissing it to just stress or so I just share that like there are good people, there are good doctors out there. There's, you know, great compassionate doctors. And unfortunately, there are physicians who that's their go-to, but
You can fire those.
I'm sorry.
And you can fire those. Like I want to give
Exactly
to every woman, every person watching this. If a doctor minimizes your symptoms and treats you like crap, you're allowed to fire them. Just go to another one, make an appointment with another one. You don't have to tell them you're leaving them. You can just not, you can ghost your doctor. It's okay. Please
Though
ghost your
though
doctor.
you do have to keep in mind, Jasmine, you probably, being in LA, you have such a
That's
plethora
true.
of options,
That is true.
whereas so many people live in
Definitely.
places where they have one, the whole community has one movement disorder specialist or neurologist for miles and miles and miles around. So
that's true.
while I absolutely agree with you and appreciate what you're saying, it's simply not an option for everyone.
Yeah. Hopefully telehealth can help with some of that, but
Sure.
no, it's definitely true. And access to healthcare is absolutely not an equality all around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Stephanie, I wanted to just call back to kind of what you were saying, that it's bad enough that you just lost your husband. You're starting to exhibit symptoms of your own. And because of your lived experience in healthcare and being a woman, you already know that there's a pretty good chance that someone's going to question you and say, oh, maybe you're having a sympathy tremor. And I mean, just the mental impact of having to think in that way, it impacts absolutely everything we do on the planet as women, I think. I mean, for most of us, many of us.
Yeah. And even very well-intentioned friends and family members, when I would say, oh, you know, my hand is bothering me. Steph, you don't have Parkinson's. Like you've been under a lot of stress. And yes, that was true. And I'm still experiencing something. And, you know, now they feel kind of bad about it, quite honestly. But they were, I think, in their, you know, love, were trying to protect me from, you know, what is now my reality. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to manage. And thankfully, actually I just I don't know if I'm sort of going on a little bit different of a segue here, but I got referred to a health psychologist, which I have been working with a therapist for the last almost 2 years now on like caregiver stress and then grief loss. And my neurologist referred me to a health psychologist, which I am really curious and looking forward to working with that specialty. Have any of you had that experience of working with health psychology?
Well, I had an interesting experience. I saw a private practice neurologist. I apologize, the dog is whining. Private practice neurologist as a second, actually third opinion And he asked me, his first question to me is, are you having trouble accepting your diagnosis? And I said, well, that's interesting that you ask. Why do you ask? And he said, because you've gotten a lot of opinions. And I thought, well, that's sort of interesting. But he said to me, we have a therapist in our office who sees our neurologic patients. Would you like to see her? And, you know, the difference in that private practice offering that sort of thing was really special, I thought. And I wonder if he offers that as much to the men. That's just in my mind. But one comment I wanted to make as I was listening to all of you, if you think about the history of women in medicine, I mean, the term histrionic comes from having a uterus, right? A hysterectomy is removal of the uterus. So, you know, there's a history in medicine steeped long into the past about women and physicians and how they have seen women. In fact, there's even some evidence that functional neurologic disorder, which can present with functional Parkinsonism or exacerbation of Parkinson's, is thought to have been from a psychological standpoint. And you know, they look at the history of women in general, but that was just a comment I had. But I thought that was interesting to have a doctor actually attend to my emotional health who is a neurologist. I thought that was fantastic.
How many of you guys have female MDSs?
I had one, but
No, Sandra? Karen, you don't?
actually,
I
Not
found
you.
my female MDS better than my male MDSs, and I've had a bunch of both.
Why did you think that was, Patty?
I felt like she understands when I'm talking, you know, even for the programming for DBS, a woman has done much better than the male doctors that I've had.
Did you feel more comfortable speaking?
Yeah, I'm
with
sure
her?
that's part of it, but
Yeah.
also I'm not one to talk much about emotions. My husband says that he's the woman of our couple, of our group, because he talks all the time. He talks his emotions. I'm not one to do that, but when I did, she was much more attentive and interested in knowing that kind of stuff, where my male MDSs have been pretty, you know, straightforward, that they want to talk about symptoms. They want to talk about what's going on with PD, but not how I feel about it.
Sure.
I had a mix. I mean, I've seen probably more doctors than I can count. It's very much kind of I've experienced both. Right now, my MDS is a man, and I just really love my MDS. He's just absolutely fantastic. He's actually a DO as opposed to an MD. And it's interesting because I've also had another MDS.
Yasmin, can you explain what that means to the
I'm
audience?
sorry.
If people don't know.
Yeah. And so MD, medical doctor, DO, doctor of osteopathy, they have the same, they're equivalent degrees. So DOs can be any type of doctor than MD is. The philosophy of their schooling is osteopathic, allopathic. Their whole thing is about the body being an interconnected system. Instead of treating it as like individual pieces, which I sort of think really lends itself to Parkinson's, because and at least with my MDS, who was really great before, but I feel like just kind of wasn't the just the right doctor for me, was very much like, I treat neurological symptoms only. Whereas my current MDS is just like, Parkinson's affects every single part of your body, and we're gonna roll with the punches. Whatever weird stuff comes up, we'll deal with. And he sort of treats it as one disorder, as opposed to just like, okay, I'm gonna send you to 25 different doctors for all the different problems, which, I mean, not to say that that's not important. Like, my pain doctor is a huge part of my care team. You know, my urologist is a part of my care team. There's tons of different doctors that are important, and that can provide specific consistent specific you know, care for the specific problems that they might have. That specific knowledge that's important. Like, my pain doctor has just figured out the right medication for me, and I don't think anyone else could have done that. But he's just been really good at treating it as a whole thing, and really listening to me. And he also is asked me about previous experiences, and he's really good at teaching the residents and stuff because he wants people to, well, he wants, my experience to not be repeated,
Sure.
from when I was younger, and a lot of the bad neurological experiences. I think finding the neurologist that is right for you, and like not everyone might have the same access to that, but when you find it, you keep it because it's so important. But yeah, I think that gender does probably play a part of it, but there are outliers.
I had an interesting experience. I always get the note after my appointment because I want to see what the doctor writes in the note. And I often will cry at my neurology appointment. It's emotional. It's sometimes makes me sad. I am not experiencing anxiety. I'm telling you that because I know what I'm experiencing. The note often will read that I am anxious.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not what's happening. That's not why I'm crying. And they never said, well, why are you crying? What is making you feel a certain way? What are you experiencing right now? Just an assumption. That's anxiety. Now, I wonder, is that because I'm a woman? Is that because of my history with mood, disorder, or, depression or anxiety being a feature of Parkinson's? I found it curious that a person would write that without asking me. Why? Now, is that because of a woman or not a woman? But
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've had both men and women for the different physicians kind of through the process. It was just listening to everybody speak though, it's funny how kind of across the board I've ended up with women, whether it's my movement disorder specialist, I went to a couple when I was searching for pharmaceutical option to add to my mix that would work, went to the Mayo, and again, I found a younger woman, very open, very receptive. But also for everything from acupuncture to sacrocranial to someone I work with for herbal and just general. They're all women. And I just think they kind of meet you where you are and see more of a holistic picture because like myself, yes, it's the physical stuff, but my emotions really play into it. Suddenly, like I realize I missed a med. Oh, I'm gonna suddenly go crazy. So I had to have symptoms that I didn't have 2 seconds ago. So for me, it's more of a mind body, like for everybody, but it's more of a mind body connection. It's not just a physical symptoms. It's just so interconnected. And I think I've had a lot of luck with women, just be more receptive, and I'm just more open. I kind of lead with, and my hormones play into it, but I do
like,
that
of course they do.
just so you know, you can put in the notes and add to the research, in case somebody asks you. So I think it's helpful.
Same with me. So I've had 2 MDSs, both of them were men, but I think the differences that I saw in both of them was that one of them was younger and he was not married. The other one was older and was married and had like 3 daughters. And when I mentioned about how I thought my period was impacting my medications and my symptoms, the one who was younger said, "Oh, I've never heard of that, period." And then the one who was older and, had a lot of women around him mentioned, "I've never heard that before with any of my patients, but I believe you. And let's see what we can do in order for you to have some flexibility with your medication so that we can get your symptoms under control." So that was my experience with that.
But I believe you is
amazing.
the most empowering line you can be told by a doctor. I've not seen this, but I acknowledge what you're going through. It's like kind of revolutionary when you hear that.
It truly is.
I quite literally got a chill when you said that. It is that powerful to hear, I believe you. That's just, it almost gets me a little bit choked up. It's such, it changes your world, right?
Yeah.
You got yourself,
That validation of what
validation.
you feel is real. I might not see it how you experience it, but I believe you, and let's do something to help you live your life better.
Yes.
That's that sense of partnering with your physician. That is so, so important. The old days of the hierarchy, it's just, I don't think that we get the best care in that old model. And I think seeing ourselves as a partner in our own care and being, validated, empowered, encouraged, to be curious and explore, I think is really important for those of us living with a chronic disease, which is hard for me to say out loud.
Hey,
Yeah.
Steph,
Yeah,
are you going to your husband's doctor?
I will be. Yep. I made a switch. So in my first appointment, so I was just assigned a neurologist, a movement disorder specialist, which was my other clue, like, oh, my primary care doctor is suspicious because in the system that our movement disorder specialists are in, you just get assigned. And he was lovely, but he also knew that we had a long history with Dr. Manjan, who is a woman, and they talked about my care, and he was very supportive in me transitioning to her. So
Wait, she was your husband's doctor or not?
so the physician who diagnosed me was not my husband's doctor. But I'm going to switch to my husband's doctor.
Because I wonder about that.
In what way, Patty?
I don't know. I think that it would be really hard
Yeah.
because she would always be comparing you to him.
Mhm.
And you also have very strong emotions in regards to that doctor.
Yeah. We talked about it together. And I appreciate your concern, and that thought floated through my mind. I also talked with the clinic social worker about that dynamic. And we came to we meaning me and my husband's doctor came to a mutual agreement that we wanted to work together. So I just feel like there's such an important trust history with her, and that feels right. Yeah, that will serve me. But I hear your concern. There's a lot of emotions and it's 12 years of her being part of our family, right?
Yeah.
And working with us over time. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my dad's seeing a doctor my doctor hired to our system because it was a faster thing, but they work together. And it's, in some ways that comparison, it's different because we're related and it's the same gene, but I think that the doctors, we see them every 3 to 6 months or so for our lives, pretty much. The doctors, it's really important that you're comfortable with the doctor because they become a very intimate part of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is a great place to just wrap us up for today. Thank you all so much for being here.